The numbers on the register began to blur, swimming like black tadpoles in a pool of sickening fluorescent green light. The incessant beeping of the scanner was a nail being hammered into my skull, each scan a fresh jolt of pain. Just 10 more minutes, Naomi. 10 more minutes, and you can go home. But home wasn't rest. Home was David's rattling cough and the stack of red-stamped envelopes on the counter, a paper monument to our slow-motion collapse. The man standing before me was an island of stillness in the frantic Friday evening rush. He placed a single bottle of expensive whiskey on the conveyor belt, its amber liquid catching the light. He wore a suit so black it seemed to drink the very air around it, tailored with a precision that screamed money I couldn't even comprehend. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed somewhere over my head, but I felt the weight of his attention like a physical pressure. His hands, resting on the counter, were clean and unadorned, save for a single, heavy silver ring on his pinky finger, etched with a character I didn't recognize. My own hands, by contrast, were trembling as I reached for the bottle. The tips of my fingers were raw from stocking shelves during my lunch break, another $10 I desperately needed. My dark green apron, stained with something sticky from a broken jam jar earlier, felt like a lead weight. My vision tunneled. The edges blackened, creeping inward. The man's face swam into focus for a single, sharp second. He had eyes that were dark and depthless, a jaw cut from granite, and an utter lack of expression that was more intimidating than any scowl. He wasn't just a customer. He was a presence, a shift in the room's gravity. I opened my mouth to state the total, but the only thing that came out was a gasp. The floor tilted violently, rushing up to meet me. A wave of dizziness, cold and absolute, washed over me, and the world dissolved into a chaotic symphony of sound. The clatter of the whiskey bottle, a woman's shriek, the frantic shouting of my manager, before it all went silent. Just before the darkness took me completely, I felt the jarring impact I was expecting replaced by something else. Strong arms, impossibly fast, wrapped around me. A scent of cedarwood, clean rain, and something metallic, like cold steel, filled my last conscious breath. The last thing I registered was the shocking, solid warmth of a body against mine, caging me in the fall. I woke to the scent of lavender and the impossible softness of silk. My eyes fluttered open, heavy and slow, adjusting to a dim, golden light filtering through heavy curtains. This wasn't my room. My room smelled of dust and the vape rub I put on David's chest every night. My bed was a lumpy mattress that groaned every time I moved. This was a bed that sighed, a cloud of down and thread counts I couldn't begin to guess. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the fog in my head. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was vast, decorated in muted grays and deep charcoals. A single, stark painting of a black ocean under a moonless sky hung on the wall opposite me. There was no clutter, no sign of life, only a chilling, sterile perfection. My worn-out sneakers were placed neatly on a rug by the door, a rug that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. My dark green apron was gone. I was still in my dark blue shirt and jeans, but the feeling of being stripped of my uniform, my armor, left me feeling raw and exposed. The door opened with a soft, nearly silent click. The man from the store stepped inside. He moved with a liquid grace that was unnerving in a man his size, his presence filling the cavernous room and sucking all the air out. He held a glass of water in one hand. He stopped several feet from the bed, his dark eyes sweeping over me, missing nothing. It wasn't a leering gaze, it was analytical, dissecting. He saw the way I clutched the silk comforter, the tremor in my hands, the fear widening my eyes. "You fainted," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, as smooth and dark as the whiskey he'd been buying. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Where am I?" I managed, my own voice a pathetic, scratchy whisper. I hated how weak I sounded. "My home." He placed a glass of water on a polished mahogany nightstand. "Drink," it was a command, soft but unbreakable. I stared at the glass, then back at him. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities.
kidnapping,
trafficking. The headlines you skim over, thinking that could never happen to me. I have to go, I stammered, my pride warring with my terror. My brother, he's waiting for me. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in the depths of his eyes. A spark of,
what?
interest? Your brother can wait, he stated calmly. You are unwell. You will rest. He pulled a sleek, minimalist chair from a corner and sat, creating a silent barrier between me and the door. He didn't cross his arms or lean forward. He simply sat, perfectly composed, watching me as if I were a complex puzzle he was slowly solving. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. My internal monologue was a frantic scream, a litany of every horror story I'd ever heard. I needed to get out. I needed to get to David. He was only 11 and his asthma was bad this week. He'd be scared. He'd be waiting for me to read to him, to make him the instant noodles he loved. Who are you? I asked, forcing a strength into my voice that I didn't feel. My hands were balled into fists under the comforter, my nails digging into my palms. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that was almost predatory. My name is Minjun, he said it simply, as if it should mean something to me. It didn't. It was just a name, but the way he said it, with such quiet, unshakable authority, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Why did you bring me here, Minjun? I pressed, pushing his name out like a shield. I could have gone to a hospital. Or my manager could have called my emergency contact. Hospitals are inefficient, he replied, his voice flat. And your manager was panicking. It was simpler to bring you here. Simpler for whom? My mind raced, trying to find a logical reason, a non-terrifying explanation for a wealthy stranger bringing an unconscious cashier back to his mansion. None came. He saw the distress, the fear warring on my face. His gaze dropped to my hands, still clenched beneath the covers. Then it moved to my neck, where I knew the worn collar of my shirt was frayed. He saw everything. He saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around my eyes, the cheap dye fading in my hair, the subtle tremor of malnourishment I tried so hard to hide. You work too much, he observed, another statement of fact. You do not eat enough. You don't know anything about me. I snapped, the word sharper than I intended. Pride, fierce and stupid, rose up to choke me. I would not be analyzed and pitted by this man, this stranger who held me captive in his silk-lined cage. He didn't react to my tone. It was like throwing a pebble at a mountain. I know that you weigh almost nothing, he said, his eyes tracing the shape of me under the blanket. I know your pulse was dangerously slow. And I know you are lying when you say you are fine. His perception was a violation. He saw past the walls I so carefully built every single day, the cheerful, I'm good, how are you, that I gave to everyone, from my coworkers to David. He saw the truth, and it terrified me more than any physical threat. My bag. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. My worn, canvas tote bag with my keys, my wallet, my life inside it. And my phone. My phone, with its cracked screen and its constant, chirping reminders. It was sitting on the nightstand next to the glass of water, placed there as deliberately as everything else in the room. A notification lit up the screen, a small, bright beacon of my desperate reality.
David, inhaler refill 2.
My breath hitched. I scrambled for it, my movements clumsy with panic. My fingers had just brushed the cool glass of the screen when his hand shot out, impossibly fast, and covered it. His fingers were long and cool, his grip firm but not painful. It was the grip of a man who didn't need to apply pressure to prove his strength. What are you hiding, Naomi? He asked, his voice a low murmur. He hadn't raised it, but the quiet intensity was more menacing than a shout. He lifted the phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. My lock code was laughably simple. David's birthday. He didn't even need to guess. He just watched me, and I knew my panicked glance had given it away. He swiped it open on the first try. My stomach plummeted. He held the phone, angling it so I couldn't see, but I knew what he was looking at. The lock screen was a picture of me and David last summer, both of us grinning, David missing a front tooth. Then he would see the notifications. The overdue bill from the pediatric pulmonologist. The text from my landlord, the third one this week, threatening eviction. The calendar alerts, meticulously scheduled for every dose of David's medication, every nebulizer treatment. A meticulously documented timeline of my failure. I watched his face, desperate for any reaction. There was none. His expression remained a mask of detached calm, but his dark eyes moved methodically, absorbing every detail, every text, every missed call from a debt collector. He was seeing the raw, ugly truth of my life, the one I papered over with fake smiles and clipped, "I'm fine"s. It felt like he was peeling back my skin layer by layer, exposing every nerve. "Please," I whispered, the sound broken. "Give it back," he ignored me. He scrolled through my messages, his thumb moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He was reading my frantic texts to my manager, begging for more shifts. He was reading the automated replies from payday loan companies, denying my applications. He was reading my entire, miserable, desperate story, all laid bare on a 5-inch cracked screen. When he finally looked up from the phone, the air in the room had changed. The detachment in his eyes was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. It was the look of a man who had confirmed a theory. He knew my secret now. Not just that I was poor, but that I was drowning and the weight of my sick little brother was the anchor pulling me under. He set the phone down on the nightstand, the sound of plastic on wood echoing in the silent room.
He didn't look at me.
He stood, walked to the enormous window, and pushed back one of the heavy gray curtains. Muted afternoon light streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He stood with his back to me, a formidable silhouette against the light. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare of exposure. My secret, the one I guarded so fiercely because it was inextricably tied to David's vulnerability, was now in the hands of this powerful, dangerous stranger. What would he do with it? Use it against me? The thought was nauseating. He pulled his own phone from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. It was a thin, black sliver of technology that made mine look like a child's toy. He tapped the screen and brought it to his ear, his gaze fixed on the manicured, unnaturally green lawn outside. "Choi," he said into the phone. The rest of the conversation was in Korean. I couldn't understand a word, but I understood the tone. It was clipped, efficient, and utterly commanding. He gave a series of short, sharp orders, pausing only to listen to a response I couldn't hear. He mentioned a name, Dr. Kim, and the name of a hospital, St. Jude's Children's. My heart stopped. That was David's hospital. How did he know that? He must have seen it on the overdue bill notifications. He spoke for another minute, his voice never rising, never betraying a single hint of emotion. Then he hung up. He slid the phone back into his pocket and turned to face me. The mask was back in place. His face was a blank canvas.
"It has been handled," he said.
What? What has been handled? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. Who did you call? What did you do? Dr. Kim is the finest pediatric pulmonologist in the city. He will be taking over your brother's case, he explained, as if discussing the weather. The outstanding balance at his current clinic has been cleared. A specialist is on his way to your apartment now with the correct medication and a new nebulizer. I stared at him, my mouth agape. It was too much. It was impossible. Clearing that bill would take me years. A private consultation with a specialist like Dr. Kim was a fantasy. He had just rearranged the entire landscape of my life with a single 2-minute phone call.
Why?
The word was barely a breath. It was the only question I had left. Why would he do this? What did he want in return? Nothing from a man like this was free. Your brother's health is a distraction, he said, his voice cold and pragmatic. You cannot be useful to me if you are worried about him. Useful? The word landed like a stone in my gut. So that's what this was. I wasn't a person to him. I was a project, an asset to be managed. The terror I felt began to curdle into a slow-burning anger. He had invaded my life, peeled back my secrets, and was now handling my problems, all for some unknown purpose that served only him. The anger gave me a surge of adrenaline, a desperate, foolish courage. I swung my legs out of the bed, my bare feet hitting the plush, cool rug. The room spun for a second, but I steadied myself, gripping the edge of the nightstand. "I don't want her help," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but you have no right. I'm leaving. I have to get to my brother." I took a step towards the door, expecting him to move, to shout, to grab me. He did none of those things. He simply stood there, an immovable object. His stillness was more effective than any physical restraint. It communicated, in no uncertain terms, that I was not going anywhere unless he allowed it. "I told you. Your brother is being cared for," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "My man is there now. He will ensure David is safe and has everything he needs." A man. He had sent a stranger, one of his men, to my home. To David. A fresh wave of panic washed over me, eclipsing the anger. "You sent someone to my apartment? You can't do that," I cried, taking another step toward him, my fists clenched at my sides. "Get him out of there. He'll scare David." "He is discreet," Minjun countered, his calm infuriating. "He is there to deliver the medical supplies and to watch the apartment. To ensure no one else comes looking for you." "Looking for me? Who would be looking for me?" I asked, my voice rising with hysteria. My life was small, pathetic. I worked, I took care of David, I slept. No one would be looking for me except my landlord. Minjun's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "People to whom you owe money are often impatient. They do not care about sick brothers or fainting spells. The payday loan. The one I'd finally gotten approved last month, with an interest rate that was basically criminal. I was 2 weeks late on the first payment. I had been getting threatening texts, but I dismissed them as empty bluster. A cold dread seeped into my bones. He knew about that, too.
Of course he did.
He knew everything. "You will stay here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It wasn't a suggestion. It is the safest place for you." He had taken my brother, my debt, my freedom, and twisted them into a justification for caging me in his luxurious prison. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't laid a hand on me since he took my phone, but I had never felt more powerless in my entire life. I was trapped, not by locks and bars, but by his quiet, absolute control over every aspect of my world. Defeated, I sank back onto the edge of the bed. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a hollow exhaustion that went bone deep. He had an answer for everything, a countermove for every ounce of resistance I could muster. Arguing was pointless. He operated on a level of power and influence I couldn't even begin to comprehend. He simply made things happen. He watched me for a long moment, his gaze unreadable, before he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The sound of the lock engaging, a quiet, metallic snick, was deafening in the silence. I was officially a prisoner. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart. Eventually, a numb sort of curiosity took over. If I was to be trapped here, I might as well understand the cage. I stood up on shaky legs and began to explore. The room was even larger than I'd first thought, with an adjoining bathroom that looked like something out of a magazine. It was all marble and chrome, with a walk-in shower big enough for 5 people and a collection of expensive, minimalist toiletries that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The closet was a walk-in, empty except for a single, thick silk robe hanging on a hook. Everything was clean, sterile, and impersonal. It was the room of a ghost, or a man who didn't live so much as exist. Finally, I went to the window he had looked out of. I pulled the heavy curtain aside and stared out. The view was breathtaking and heartbreaking all at once. The room overlooked a sprawling garden, a perfect, manicured masterpiece of Japanese design. A stone path wound its way through carefully placed rocks and sculpted trees, leading to a serene koi pond where vibrant orange fish swam in lazy circles. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely enclosed by a high stone wall. There was no gate in sight. It was a perfect, beautiful prison. The sky above was turning a bruised purple as evening approached. A storm was rolling in. The air had that heavy, electric feeling. It mirrored the tempest inside my chest, a chaotic mix of fear, anger, and a bewildering, shameful flicker of relief. David was safe. David had medicine. David was seeing a top specialist. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of his health was not solely on my shoulders. And that realization was the most terrifying thing of all. This man, this Minjun, had bought my peace of mind, and I had no idea what price he would eventually demand in return. Hours later, the door clicked open again. Minjun entered, followed by a woman in a simple black dress who carried a tray. She placed the tray on a small table, bowed silently, and left as quietly as she had come. The tray held a bowl of steaming soup, a piece of crusty bread, and a glass of what looked like fresh juice. My stomach growled, a loud, embarrassing reminder that I hadn't eaten anything but a stale granola bar all day. I didn't move. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He ignored the food and my stubborn silence. He walked over to the chair and sat down, his posture just as unnervingly perfect as before. "We need to talk about Mr. Petrov," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. The name meant nothing to me. "I don't know anyone named Petrov," I said, my voice flat. "He knows you," Minjun countered. "He runs the company that gave you your loan." A small, unpleasant man with a fondness for breaking fingers. My blood ran cold. The threatening text suddenly felt very real. They weren't just bluster from some anonymous call center. There was a specific man, who was angry with me. "How do you know that?" "It is my business to know such things," he said dismissively. "Petrov is a minor player and annoyance. But he is a part of a network that rivals my own. Your debt to him makes you a liability." A loose end. It was starting to make a horrifying kind of sense. This wasn't about me at all. I was a pawn. My stupid, desperate $50-a-week loan had somehow entangled me in a war between two criminal organizations. I had stumbled out of my small, desperate life and into a world of violence and power that I couldn't have imagined. "So, what is this?" asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Am I a hostage? A bargaining chip?" He considered this for a moment. "You are a complication that I am now managing," he said finally. "Petrov's methods are crude. He would not have simply come to your apartment to collect. He would have made an example of you to frighten his other debtors." The implication hung heavy in the air. He wasn't just imprisoning me, he was protecting me. The thought was dizzying. The man who had taken my freedom was also the one shielding me from a violent, brutal fate. My fear of him was absolute, but now a new fear was creeping in. A fear of what lay outside these walls. A fear of a man named Petrov. Minjun saw the understanding dawn on my face. "You see now," he said, not with triumph, but with a quiet finality. "Your world is no longer what it was this morning." He stood and walked toward the empty closet. I flinched, expecting him to leave again, but he stopped, turning back to look at me. His gaze was intense, analytical, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. It was a flicker of something deeper, something possessive. He gestured toward the clothes I was wearing, my faded cashier's uniform. "You will not wear those again," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. He opened the closet door, and I saw that it was no longer empty. It was now filled with clothes. Simple things, soft-looking sweaters in shades of cream and gray, dark-washed jeans, plain t-shirts. There were no bright colors, no patterns. It was a wardrobe curated to be invisible, yet I knew from the look of the fabric that each piece was exquisitely made and astronomically expensive. He had bought me a new life, a new skin to wear in his world. He then walked over to the bed, his movements fluid and silent. He stopped just before me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He reached out, and I flinched violently, squeezing my eyes shut. I waited for a blow, a rough touch, but it never came. Instead, I felt the ghost of a touch, his fingers hovering just over the skin of my forearm. I opened my eyes. He was staring at a faint, purplish bruise on my arm, probably from where I'd hit the counter during my fall. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. With infinite slowness, he lowered his hand, and his thumb brushed against the edge of the bruise. The touch was featherlight, but it sent a bolt of pure electricity through me. My skin tingled where he made contact, a confusing, terrifying jolt of awareness.
It wasn't sexual, not exactly.
It was a touch of ownership, a branding. He was examining his property for damage. I snatched my arm back as if I'd been burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air between us was thick with unspoken things, with a tension so palpable it felt like I could choke on it. This was the shift. The moment the dynamic between us warped into something else, something far more dangerous than a simple captor and his prisoner. This was the beginning of the real price. He saw the turmoil in my eyes, the war between fear and a confusing, traitorous flutter in my stomach. A corner of his mouth tilted up in a barely perceptible, humorless smirk. "Eat," he commanded softly, his gaze dropping to the untouched tray of food. "You will need your strength." I did as I was told. My pride was a distant memory, burned away by fear and the shocking intimacy of his touch. I ate the soup mechanically, my hands shaking so badly that the spoon rattled against the ceramic bowl. It was a simple vegetable broth, but it was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted, rich and warm, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. He watched me eat every last spoonful, his silence a heavy blanket over the room. When I was done, he seemed satisfied. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. It was then that the door opened without a knock. A man in a suit identical to Minjun's, but not nearly as well-fitting, stepped inside. He was older, with a worried expression, and he bowed deeply to Minjun before speaking in hushed, urgent Korean. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Something was wrong, very wrong.
민윤의 entire demeanor changed.
The calm, controlled facade cracked, revealing the cold, hard predator beneath. His body went rigid, his face becoming a mask of stone. He listened intently, his only response a single, sharp question in his native tongue. The man answered, his voice low and deferential, and whatever he said made Minjun's eyes flash with a dangerous light. He dismissed the man with a curt nod. The man bowed again and backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer just tense, it was lethal. Minjun turned to face me, and the full force of his formidable presence washed over me. He was no longer just a wealthy, intimidating man. He was a king in his castle who had just been told his enemies were at the gates. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and they held no trace of the quiet observer from before. They were the eyes of a mafia boss, a man who dealt in violence and absolutes. I felt pinned by his gaze, a butterfly under glass. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. There was only him and the terrifying, unspoken threat that now filled the room. He took a step toward me, his movements precise and deliberate. He stopped, leaving only a foot of space between us, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. "The people you owe are looking for you," he said, his voice a low, chilling growl that vibrated through the floor. "Petrov's men. They went to your apartment." The world tilted again, but this time I didn't faint. A cold, stark terror held me upright. They had gone to my home, where David was. "My brother," I started, my voice a strangled cry. "Is safe," he cut me off, his tone absolute. "My men intercepted them. There was a disagreement. It has been resolved. The word was so clean, so final. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick, that it meant something bloody and violent had happened on the doorstep of my rundown apartment building. I had brought this darkness into my brother's life. Minjun saw the horror and guilt on my face. He reached out, and this time I didn't flinch. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek in a gesture that was shockingly gentle. But his eyes were merciless. "They will not stop looking. They now know you have a connection to me. You are a target." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to an intimate, possessive whisper that was meant only for me. The scent of cedar and steel filled my senses. "From now on, the only place you are safe is by my side. Do you understand, Naomi?" It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A life sentence. I had traded the cage of poverty for this one, a gilded, silken cage guarded by a monster. And looking into his dark, bottomless eyes, I knew I would never be free again. I could only nod, a single, jerky movement. My world had irrevocably shrunk to the confines of this room, to the suffocating presence of this man. And the most terrifying part was the small, treacherous voice in the back of my mind that whispered I was finally safe.